Why Our Hearts Are Restless, Decoding Augustine's most famous sentence. There is a moment late at night when the world outside finally falls quiet. The screen is dark, the urgent notifications cease, and you are left alone with the strange architecture of your own mind. It is in this profound stillness that the true noise of being human often emerges. It is a low, persistent hum, an itch just beneath the skin of consciousness. It's the feeling that no matter how much you have achieved, how many goals you've crushed, or how perfectly curated your life might appear, there is still an absence, a space where something vital ought to be. We call this feeling many things: anxiety, ennui, the Sunday night dread. But perhaps the most accurate, and certainly the oldest, name for it is simply restlessness. This profound, defining feature of human existence, this feeling of always yearning for the next thing, the better thing, the missing piece, was perfectly crystallized almost 17 centuries ago by a man who knew more about chaotic searching than perhaps anyone else in history. His name was Aurelius Augustinus, and he didn't write his observations in a comfortable study or after a long period of beatific contemplation. He wrote them as an exhausted, guilt-ridden intellectual mess, a former partygoer, ambitious rhetorician, and philosophical skeptic who had spent decades trying to satisfy his massive hunger with everything the Roman Empire had to offer. Augustine had consumed fame, power, love, and various esoteric philosophies, and yet, at the end of every exhausting pursuit, he found the satisfaction was fleeting, the pleasure always dying just as it bloomed. His own story was one of serial disappointment in the face of temporary gratification. And so, he opens his foundational work, the Confessions, not with a decree or a prayer, but with a statement of inescapable psychological truth. It is arguably the most famous sentence ever written on the nature of human desire, a sentence that hangs over Western thought like an eternal question mark. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. It is easy, especially now, to dismiss this as mere theology, a simple statement of faith meant only for believers. But to do so is to miss its radical, world-changing depth. This is not just religious doctrine. This is the first great treatise on the existential architecture of the human soul. Let's dismantle it, piece by piece, starting with the premise: you have made us for yourself. This claim argues for a concept of existence radically different from the one we operate under today. In the modern view, we are accidents, products of random collision, defined only by the fleeting goals we choose for ourselves. We are independent actors carving meaning out of a meaningless void. Augustine flips this script. He claims we are fundamentally derivative. We are not self-generated. We are designed. And crucially, we are designed for relationship. The purpose precedes the product. We are equipped with an engine built to run on a specific fuel, and if we try to fill the tank with anything else, wealth, validation, power, even human love, the engine sputters. It never fully catches. This isn't about control. It's about congruence. If the structure of a lock is made to fit one specific key, trying to jam 1,000 beautiful shiny pebbles into the mechanism will only result in frustration and damage. The pebbles are lovely, but they were never the key. This leads directly to the second, more relatable half of the sentence: and our heart is restless. Augustine does not use the word restless lightly. In his original Latin, the word is inquietum. It doesn't mean mildly anxious or bored. It means fundamentally unquietable, perpetually disturbed, unable to settle. It describes a heart that has an intrinsic, built-in dynamic towards transcendence. Our restlessness is not a flaw in the design, it is the most crucial feature. It is the cosmic homing device, constantly signaling that we are not yet home. Consider the human phenomenon of perpetual striving. Why does the multimillionaire keep working? Why does the famous artist constantly chase the next groundbreaking piece? Why, even after finding seemingly perfect love, do we sometimes feel a pang of loneliness that nothing external can touch? Augustine provides the unflinching diagnosis: because every single earthly good, every temporary fix, is finite. They are all beautiful reflections of the source, but they are not the source itself. They cannot sustain infinite appetite because they are not infinite. If you are starving for infinity, consuming anything finite will only leave you hungry again within the hour. The restlessness is simply the evidence of an infinite capacity for desire locked within a finite body, a phenomenon that guarantees our striving is always higher than our achievement. It ensures our ambition always exceeds our grasp. Augustine isn't trying to scare us into faith, he is trying to explain the reality we already experience. He is saying, look around. If you are exhausted from chasing satisfaction only to find disappointment, that exhaustion is not a sign of your personal failing. It is a sign that you are operating the system incorrectly. The restlessness is the pain of the soul recognizing its true, deep, inherent purpose. It is the inescapable urge to connect the designed object back to the designer, and that is why the sentence resolves inevitably with the promise of rest, until it rests in you. This rest is not the cessation of activity, nor is it sleep. It is the end of the search. It is the fundamental settling of the self into its proper, designed context. It is the moment the key finally turns in the lock and the mechanism clicks into place. If we understand Augustine correctly, our modern existential anxiety is not some psychological malady invented in the last century. It is simply the unavoidable result of the human heart attempting to rest in things too small, too fleeting, and too perishable to hold it. The silence of the night, therefore, is not a void. It is an invitation to listen to that ancient, persistent hum and follow its signal back to the only place it has ever truly wanted to go. The psychology of the pear theft, understanding petty desires and true sin. There is a strange gravity to midnight silence. It strips away the day's distractions and forces you to stare into the ceiling where all the ghosts of your past decisions reside. Sleep becomes a gatekeeper, demanding a toll of clarity before you are allowed entry, and inevitably, if you listen long enough, you hear the quiet, metallic click of that lock turning on the memory of the theft. Not the big sins, the betrayals that define epochs of your life, but the small, baffling, almost meaningless transgression. The pears. Augustine calls it a fever of the soul. He didn't steal them because he was hungry. He didn't even steal them because he particularly liked pears. He writes that they were not even tempting in appearance or taste. He throws them to pigs afterward. The act was defined by its absolute uselessness. If the goal of any sin is traditionally conceived as gaining some perceived good, power, pleasure, wealth, relief, then the pear theft utterly fails the test. It offered nothing. It was pure expense. This is where the true terror of Augustine's confession lies, because it reveals something fundamental and chilling about human motivation. Sometimes we steal for the sake of stealing. We desire the deprivation itself. The true definition of transgression is not the seeking of a hidden pleasure, but the profound, terrifying truth of Amare Malum, the love of malice. It is a twisted, perverse seeking. Augustine postulates that every desire, however misplaced, is ultimately a search for God. Sin, then, is merely a poor imitation, a shadow drama where we attempt to play the role of the creator. When we steal light, we are performing an imitation of abundance. When we break a law, we are imitating sovereignty. When we commit murder, we are imitating some warped, ultimate power. But the theft of the pears was the ultimate vanity, a temporary, desperate attempt to taste freedom by refusing the order of the universe simply because we could refuse it. The refusal was the reward. We are searching for a perverted sense of omnipotence, and we seek it in the shadows, hoping the absence of light will feel like light. And yet, he couldn't do it alone. Petty malice rarely walks in solitude. Sin craves an audience. He details how the theft was fundamentally tied to the company he kept. If he had been alone, the impulse would have died in his throat, recognized for the pathetic impulse it was. But the fellowship of sin provides a crucial social validation. When you commit a useless transgression with others, the malice becomes less about the act itself and more about the collective bond, the shared secret of rejection. You are affirming the group's superiority over the rules that bind the rest of the world. It transforms the small act of breaking a neighbor's fence into a declaration of independence for the juvenile soul. The sin is not merely the act, it is the shared gaze that confirms the act's existence. You want to hear the other laugh, confirming that the forbidden taste is sweeter when it is forbidden together. That need for complicity underscores the profound weakness of evil. True goodness needs no witness. It is self-sustaining. But darkness, being an absence, requires mirrors. It needs other human beings to reflect its reality back, otherwise it dissolves into nothingness. This childhood incident, trivial on the surface, became the keyhole through which Augustine viewed the entirety of his fallen nature. It wasn't the weight of the theft that mattered, it was the psychological mirror it held up. If a man, even as a boy, is capable of willing ill for the sake of ill, where does his true meaning lie? The answer arrives, not in a grand theological pronouncement, but in the quiet surrender to faith. The very act of confessing the pettiest desire becomes the path toward the greatest illumination. To understand life, you must first be brave enough to confront the absurdity of the stolen pears, to admit you once loved the darkness not because it promised anything, but simply because it was dark. The whole of his meaning, the architecture of his faith, the salvation of his soul, all rests on the confession of stealing something he didn't even want. It is a humbling and terrifying truth. That admission, made under the silent watch of the sleepless night, is perhaps the first honest prayer. It is the moment we stop running from the shadow of our past self and finally, simply, wait for the light. The two cities within you, choosing your spiritual home before sleep. We've spent the entire day pursuing comfort. We chase safety in our investments, security in our relationships, and validation in our work. We build magnificent structures around ourselves, attempting to insulate the heart from the harsh realities of the world. But as the lights go out and the noise of the external world diminishes, a deeper, far more critical question arises. Where do we truly belong? Where is the spiritual home our soul seeks refuge in before sleep claims us? St. Augustine, the great philosopher who wrestled so deeply with the nature of human desire, concluded that we are not simply residents of earth, but citizens of two distinct spiritual kingdoms, even while lying in the same bed. He taught that everything we do, every choice we make, every thought that spins through our consciousness springs from one foundational principle, love. But he defined two kinds of love, fundamentally opposed, acting as the foundation stones for the two cities built within the architecture of your own soul. The love that defines the city of man, and the love that defines the city of God. You are, simultaneously, inhabiting both. And tonight, you must choose which allegiance holds sway over your final thoughts. The city of man is built by the love of self, extending even to the contempt of God. It is the place of restless ambition, defined by the endless cycle of wanting and acquiring, and, inevitably, the debilitating fear of losing what we possess. We build grand empires of ego here, monuments to our own capability, only to watch them crumble at the first sign of morning light or financial reversal or unexpected criticism. This city offers power, fame, and temporal pleasure, but its inescapable currency is anxiety. Its greatest architectural feature is the trapdoor beneath certainty. When you lie down and feel that creeping, gnawing discontent, the feeling that no matter how much you achieved today, it wasn't enough, you are listening to the restless demands of the city of man. This city never sleeps. It will keep you awake too, reviewing past mistakes, scripting future arguments, endlessly chasing fulfillment in shadows that disappear the moment they are grasped. Its goal is not peace. Its goal is self-preservation at all costs, a lonely, exhausting task for any finite being. The city of God, conversely, is built by the love of God, extending even to the quiet, profound contempt of self. This is not self-hatred, it is the radical freedom that comes from releasing the burden of being your own ultimate authority, your own savior. It is the recognition that the meaning of your life is anchored in something permanent, something outside the fickle fluctuations of the market, the mirror, or the opinion of the crowd. This spiritual home offers not possessions but unconditional peace, Not status, but truth. Augustine famously articulated the human condition when he declared that our hearts are fundamentally restless until they rest in him. This city is where the search ends. It is where you lay down the armor of self-justification, where your failures are seen not as final verdicts, but as necessary pathways toward humility. To enter the city of God before sleep is to choose quiet acknowledgement over loud striving. It is the deep, profound acceptance of limits, the acceptance that we are finite beings designed for infinite connection. Every night is a moment of spiritual exodus, a deliberate decision to leave one city and seek safe residence in the other. As you drift toward unconsciousness, where are your thoughts gathering? Are they caught in the noisy, echoing streets of ambition and worry, meticulously calculating tomorrow's moves, demanding your exhaustion as payment? Or are you resting in the quiet confidence of faith, allowing the day's labors and losses to simply settle, knowing that the foundation beneath you is not made of shifting sand? Tonight, do not just fall asleep. Choose your home. Choose the spiritual citizenship that grants you the true, deep peace necessary for renewal. Let the quiet darkness be your entry gate into the city where restlessness finally finds its end. Let it be the city of rest. If this honest look at our shadows resonates with you, leave a like to mark your presence in this quiet reflection. The hidden tyranny of habit, how our chains are forged by custom. This hour, suspended between the exhausted day and the promised oblivion of sleep, is perhaps the most honest time we possess. Lying here, waiting, the physical world retreats, and the mind, that terrible engine, begins its unauthorized inventory. We chase sleep like a debtor chasing currency, but the mind will not be paid off. It demands we confront the day's ledger, the small failures, the compromises, and the terrifying consistency with which we repeat them. We call these repetitions routine or efficiency, but in the quiet dark, they reveal themselves to be something far more ominous: custom. Custom is the silent architect of our confinement. It is the insidious belief that today must mirror yesterday simply because yesterday was easier than inventing something new. It is the path of least resistance becoming the path of no return. We think we choose our actions, but eventually our actions choose us. This is the hidden tyranny, the slow, gradual relinquishing of the self to the prescripted impulse. The chain that binds us is not made of iron, but of millions of tiny, comfortable, identical links, forged one by one until the resulting weight is unbearable yet unnoticeable. We become creatures optimized for predictability, confusing comfort with fulfillment. We mistake the absence of friction for the presence of freedom. The ancient struggle is not between good and evil. It is between the self we intend to be and the self that habit insists we are. It was St. Augustine, lying broken on the threshold of his own conversion, who defined this conflict with agonizing clarity. He understood that the moment of recognition, the understanding that an action is wrong, does not automatically grant the power to stop. His famous lament, "I wanted to choose, but I had already been chosen." He saw the human will as profoundly divided. The mind commanded the body to abstain, and the body obeyed. The mind commanded the hand to write, and the hand obeyed. But when the mind commanded the mind itself, when the will commanded the will, it resisted. Why? Because the will had been weakened by custom, by indulgence, by years of being dragged by its own weight toward lesser desires. Augustine realized that our desire is the core operating system of the soul. If our desires are disorganized, pointed toward fleeting material goods, then our lives will reflect that chaotic fragmentation. Our habits merely follow the trajectory of our deepest, often unexamined loves. We don't just have bad habits, we have misdirected loves. And this is where the question of faith or simply profound meaning enters the equation. If we are slaves to custom, how do we escape? We cannot merely snap the chain. The chain must be dissolved by a hotter fire, a total reorientation of desire. Augustine didn't argue for freedom from desire, but for freedom through directed desire. The meaning of life, he concluded, wasn't found in trying to will yourself into goodness. but in aligning your deepest cravings towards something that will not pass away, something worthy of the chain. If we are compelled to form habits, and we are, then the true act of freedom is to choose the highest compulsion, to make the daily excruciating custom of turning toward truth, toward compassion, toward the things that elevate the spirit rather than merely soothe the flesh. Lying here in the cold space of the night, the world demands silence, but the mind demands dialogue. We are waiting to sleep, yes, but we are also waiting for the courage to dismantle the invisible fences we spent a lifetime building. The chains of habit are too weak to be felt until they are too strong to be broken. But we must try anyway, because the only way to prove we possess a soul is to actively fight the automation of our own existence. We must choose the discomfort of waking up over the ease of falling back into the sleep of custom. Lust versus love. Augustine's radical redefinition of desire, Cupididis versus Caritas. We talk constantly about desire, the need, the wanting, the itch that promises satisfaction but rarely delivers. We chase it, we run from it. But if desire is the engine of human life, why does it so often drive us into the wrong ditches? Why does the seeking, which feels so hopeful in the beginning, so often end in restlessness and regret? This is the central question that haunted Augustine, not just in his youth, but throughout his entire life. The philosophical and theological search for the right kind of wanting. Augustine provided a radical answer, one that changed the entire framework of Western thought. He didn't merely distinguish between good desire and bad desire. He identified two foundational, organizing principles of the human spirit, two opposing forms of love that govern whether we build a life of permanence or one of perpetual decay. On one side, Cupididis, on the other, Caritas. They are not simple synonyms for lust and love in the modern romantic sense. They are orientations. They are the two types of gravitational pull acting upon the soul. Cupididis is the gravity toward the self. It is selfish love, the desire to possess, to consume, to use the world and even other people for one's own immediate fleeting pleasure or temporary gain. It is the definition of grasping. It seeks satisfaction in created, temporal things, demanding from them the permanence and infinity they simply cannot offer. The core, tragic problem of Cupididis is misplacement. We are beings designed for infinite fulfillment. We desire happiness, permanence, and absolute good. But when we apply that infinite necessary longing to finite objects, money, power, bodily pleasure, fame, the object inevitably breaks under the pressure. It cannot sustain the weight of our deepest longing. The object fails, and the restless cycle begins again. We are left thinking we need more of the finite thing, when in fact we need a fundamentally different kind of desire entirely. Augustine understood that the ultimate elevation of self above all else, the total dedication to Cupididis, builds the earthly city, the city destined for confusion and inevitable decay. Then there is Caritas, often translated simply as charity, but far better understood as true love, the rightly ordered spiritual love. Caritas is love directed upward toward the eternal good and then outward toward others, seeing them as fellow beings created for that same eternal purpose. It is a love that seeks the genuine good of the beloved, not the gratification of the lover. Crucially, Caritas does not command us to despise earthly things. Rather, it instructs us on how to use them rightly. Earthly things become tools or signs pointing toward the ultimate good rather than being mistaken for the ultimate good itself. It is the proper use of the world, seeing everything in its true, reflective place. The radical insight Augustine presents is this: every action, every choice, every desire we feel is ultimately driven by one of these two loves. We are constantly choosing between building the city of God, founded on Caritas, or the city of man, founded on Cupididis. They are not just moral categories for judging sin. They are ontological forces shaping our reality. When we choose Cupididis, we find ourselves perpetually lonely, perpetually wanting, trapped inside the echoing mirror of the self. But when we manage, through grace and conscious effort, to choose Caritas, we tap into the unifying force that binds us to something permanent. The difference between lust and love for Augustine wasn't a spectrum of intensity. It was a 180-degree turn in direction. One is the spiral inward, leading to fragmentation and sorrow. The other is the expansive movement outward, leading to peace and finally to the rest we are all truly waiting for. The failure of Manichaeism, searching for light in the dualistic darkness. The silence always deepens just before sleep takes hold. It is the hour when the mind, exhausted by its own defenses, finally allows the truly difficult questions to surface, unclothed and demanding. For 10 years, I lived in the shadow of certainty. I embraced the beautiful, terrible simplicity of Mani. The universe split, clean and irreparable, into two warring gods. A perfect, luminous good, locked in eternal struggle with a palpable, material evil. It was an intellectual comfort, a profound, theological excuse. Why did I sin? It wasn't me. It was the dark substance within my body, the foreign prince of darkness using my limbs as its battleground. I was merely the hapless territory, never truly responsible for the dark, gnawing hunger that drove my choices. But that simplicity was a lie, and the lie was exhausting. It took the clarity of Neoplatonic thought, filtered through the nascent wisdom of Ambrose, to finally shatter that elegant dualism. The Manichaean worldview promised an external enemy. Augustine found the internal mirror, the profound, terrifying realization: evil is not a thing. It is not a cosmic substance, a co-equal deity fighting for supremacy. Evil is merely the absence of good. It is a wound, not a weapon, a privation. Like darkness is the privation of light, or silence is the privation of sound. It is not an active force, but a decay. If God is infinite goodness, the perfect source of all being, then anything that truly is must derive its existence from Him. Therefore, nothing that exists can be purely, essentially evil. To exist is to possess some degree of good. This shift changes everything. It pulls the carpet out from under the feet of excuse-making. If there is no external demonic force compelling my actions, then the sin, the failure, the repeated falling short is mine alone. It is not an invasion, it is a choice, a deliberate turning away from the light I already possess. The moment I stopped blaming the darkness outside, I had to face the misdirection of the light within. This led me to the most unsettling truth about human desire. The Manichaean treated desire, especially physical, sexual desire, as the manifestation of the dark substance, something to be hated and purged. But if evil is a privation, then desire itself cannot be inherently evil. Desire is pure energy. It is the engine of the soul, designed to drive us toward fulfillment, toward God. The tragedy of the human condition is that we misidentify the target. We seek the infinite in the finite. We try to pour the ocean of our longing into the thimble of a temporary pleasure. My own lust, my concupiscence, the driving, relentless need for love and belonging, that was not the devil's doing. That was a transcendent yearning gone wrong. It was the soul confusing a reflection for the source, worshiping the gift instead of the giver. It is often said that the meaning of life is a search for happiness. Augustine taught us that true happiness is found in finding what we were designed to love and loving it rightly. The meaning of life is the realignment of desire. It is the painful, necessary process of recalibrating the compass of the heart. The man who lives by the radical dualism finds himself eternally exhausted, battling phantoms and substances that do not exist. But the man who understands evil as a lack understands that his job is not to fight the darkness, but simply to let the light in. The failure of Manichaeism wasn't just a theological defeat, it was a personal liberation. It released me from the perfect horror of cosmic stalemate and delivered me instead to the perfect hope of personal responsibility. I am not a battlefield between two gods. I am a single, flawed, magnificent creation capable of choosing the good, but prone to choosing lesser goods. And in that quiet realization, waiting for the dark of night to become the quiet of sleep, lies the seed of a lifetime of faith built not on fighting external shadows, but on embracing the persistent, undeniable light that calls us home. The light, Augustine understood, is always louder than the silence. It requires only that we stop plugging our ears. The clarity of grace, when effort fails and surrender takes over. The darkness is rarely silent. It's filled with the constant echo of yesterday's decisions and tomorrow's anxieties. You try to force the mind to stillness, counting breaths, reciting affirmations, demanding peace from the chaos of the day. But the harder you try to wrestle sleep, or clarity, or resolution into submission, the faster it runs away. This is the first, simplest lesson of profound realization, that human effort, when misapplied, is often the greatest obstacle to the very thing you seek. We are conditioned to believe in striving. We are taught that victory belongs to the tireless, the relentless, the ones who sacrifice comfort for output. We apply this same harsh, industrial logic to our spiritual and psychological landscapes. I must think my way to clarity. I must solve my lack of meaning. But true clarity, the deep, resonant knowing that shifts the architecture of your understanding, does not come from intellectual labor. It arrives in the sudden, quiet thud of resignation. It's a gift, not a wage. This gift, the moment when the heavy weight of trying drops away, is what we call grace. Grace is often simply the permission to stop trying. This struggle is not new. 2,000 years ago, staring into his own soul's abyss during endless restless nights, St. Augustine wrestled with the very same dynamic. He understood desire, not just the surface-level wanting for temporary pleasures, but the deep foundational force that drives us toward meaning. He knew that the human heart is built with a cavity that nothing material can ever truly fill. He understood the soul's exhaustion. He encapsulated the entire human condition in one magnificent, terrible realization. Our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee. This statement is often sanitized, treated as a simple declaration of faith. But look closer. It is a profound psychological observation about the nature of desire itself. We believe desire is the longing for a specific thing, a promotion, a partner, a resolution to conflict. But Augustine taught us that all minor desires are merely faulty addresses, misdirected envelopes pointing toward the ultimate foundational desire, the longing for connection, for home, for meaning, for God, for truth, whatever language you use for the absolute center. The meaning of life, the profound sense of belonging we seek, isn't hidden in a puzzle we have to solve with relentless effort. It is waiting in the chamber of the heart that we finally permit to stop straining. We mistake the striving for the purpose. We confuse the struggle with the journey. And this is where faith intercepts our failing effort. Faith in this context is not belief in historical facts, but the simple, radical act of trusting that the universe is fundamentally ordered and benevolent, even when the immediate moment feels terrifying or meaningless. It is the trust that the necessary insight, the deep connection, will arrive not through force, but through stillness. We spend our lives fighting the current, paddling frantically upstream toward a destination we think we designed ourselves. We wear ourselves down to exhaustion, and in those inevitable moments, often late at night when the body is tired but the mind refuses to quit, we finally hit a breaking point, the moment when the paddle slips from your grasp, when you realize the effort has become counterproductive. That surrender is not defeat. Surrender is alignment. It is the recognition that there is a current, a flow, a higher logic operating far outside the frantic calculation of the ego. The hidden truth, the one discovered only after the sleepless night has wrung us dry, is that when effort finally fails, grace becomes accessible. To surrender is to step out of the way of your own life, allowing the deeper truth, the larger meaning, to finally paint itself onto the canvas of your thought. The clarity you seek is what happens when you finally stop asking for it and simply allow it to be. Now let the current carry you, let the room be dark, and let the heart be still. The answer is already here. It's merely waiting for you to stop searching. Monica's silent power, the faith that changes others. There is a moment just after the world hushes where silence becomes loud. It's not the absence of sound, it is the presence of inventory. The hour when the lights are out and the mind is tasked with auditing the soul. We check the locks, we check the clock, and then we are left alone with the fundamental deficit, the distance between who we are and who we know we should be. This is the hour Augustine knew intimately. Before he was a saint, he was simply a man drowning in his own brilliance. He had mastered rhetoric, he had mastered ambition, he had mastered every sensual pleasure the crumbling empire could offer, but he had never mastered the simple, elusive art of being content. His monumental realization that the heart is ultimately restless until it finds its rest in a source greater than itself was born not from serene revelation, but from intellectual and emotional exhaustion. He chased truth through every extant philosophy, every decadent alley of earthly desire, and every chase ended the same way, with the taste of ash. Augustine found only shadows, but while he was looking for complex answers in the blinding light of the external world, the answer was being quietly, persistently, woven into his reality by the enduring prayer of his mother, Monica. How do you argue with genius? How do you debate a rhetorician who can dismantle your logic before you finish your premise? Monica never tried. Her power was silent, yet it possessed a force few armies could withstand. It was the absolute, unshakable certainty that she knew the true horizon, even when her son was obsessed with the shadows flickering on the wall of his own cave. We often mistake faith for a sudden visible miracle, a dramatic lightning bolt of change. Monica's faith was the slow, relentless erosion of stone by water. It was prayer that was less a request and more a 20-year state of being, 20 years of tears, of quiet pleading, of refusing to accept the defeat of her son's spirit. Her love was a different kind of love. It was a love that understood that the person you cherish might need to hit the very bottom of their self-made pit before they could look up and truly see the light she held for them. In this relentless waiting lies one of Augustine's most profound and hidden truths. The ultimate desire of the human heart is infinite fulfillment. The tragedy of our lives is that we try, without fail, to fill an infinite void with finite temporal things. A bigger house, a greater reputation, a temporary intoxication, a louder applause. We are trying to quench the thirst for the ocean with a thimble of rain. Monica understood this equation intuitively. She did not teach him to stop desiring. She taught him to redirect desire. The heart is restless not because it lacks desire, but because its greatest desire has been misplaced. When Augustine finally turned, and the turn was less a sudden conversion than a tired acceptance of the obvious, he realized that the power that saved him was entirely independent of his own intellect. It was the external, quiet pressure of unconditional belief. This is the terrifying, beautiful truth of Monica's silent power. It demands nothing from the recipient but surrender. Her legacy is not just that she saved her son, but that she perfectly embodied the principle that real, meaningful transformation is rarely loud, rarely instantaneous, and rarely self-generated. It is the slow, steady, undeniable pressure of love that simply refuses to leave. It is the quiet conviction that works on us while we are waiting for sleep, reminding us that the greatest desires are those that refuse to fade with the coming dawn. The meaning of time, why yesterday and tomorrow only exist in the mind. The clock stopped ticking hours ago, but the mind, refusing silence, keeps hammering out its own rhythm, a panicked tattoo of what was and what will be. We lie here, suspended between the echo of yesterday's mistakes and the anxious blueprint of tomorrow's tasks. And in this twilight space, this fragile pre-sleep reckoning, the hidden truth of time begins to emerge, shining not in the world outside, but in the architecture of consciousness itself. St. Augustine, the great philosopher of Hippo, understood this better than almost anyone who came before him. Wrestling with the infinite nature of God and the finite panic of man, He arrived at a realization that collapses the entire continuum of time into a single, unbearable instant. Augustine asked the impossible question: when we say time passes, what exactly are we measuring? If the past is gone and the future has yet to arrive, how can we measure their duration? If they are nowhere, they are nothing. They only exist as a kind of tension held taut across the membrane of the now. Yesterday, that sprawling landscape of memory, only lives as a current impression within your mind. It is not retrieved from some external archive. It is resurrected, recreated, and measured right here, right now, as a present memory. Tomorrow, that wide, promising horizon of goals and aspirations, is nothing more than a present expectation. We measure the future not by its arrival, but by the strength and persistence of our current intention toward it. The past is the present of things past. The future is the present of things future. This is the hidden truth Augustine forces us to face. Time is not a cosmic river flowing around us. It is the subjective stretching of our own attention. We are not measuring movement in the stars. We are measuring the duration of our own desire. Why do we constantly flee the present? Why is the suffocating now always the place we least want to inhabit? Because the past offers the comfort of finality. It is fixed, though potentially painful, and the future offers the seductive promise of potential. It is malleable, infinitely clean. The present, however, is where the demands live. The present is where desire meets reality, where intention must become action, and where the overwhelming pressure of our immediate lack is felt. We push meaning onto tomorrow because today feels insufficient, incomplete. We project our worth onto the future because the present demands radical acceptance of who we are right now. But Augustine teaches us that running toward tomorrow is futile because tomorrow will instantly dissolve into another demanding present. If we cannot find meaning in the absolute immediacy of this moment, we will not find it when the calendar flips. The meaning of life, then, cannot be found in the measurement of temporal duration, not in how long we live, but in how deeply we live in the brief, flickering instant of attention granted to us. If everything collapses into the present moment, if memory and expectation are just functions of our immediate consciousness, then our existence is defined by attention. What holds our focus? For Augustine, the answer must be something eternal, something outside the temporal cage he had so brilliantly constructed. If our lives are finite and our duration is illusory, the only escape from temporal anxiety is to anchor our attention to that which is infinite and unchanging. This is the Augustinian leap, from the frantic measuring of hours to the deep contemplation of value. The meaning of life is not found in the stretching of time, but in the surrender of time. It is found in recognizing that the only thing truly measurable is the present intensity of our faith, our desire, and our capacity for love. And so, we wait for sleep, relinquishing the illusion of control over what was and what will be. We lie down, letting the narrow, terrifying gateway of the now finally widen. The darkness surrounds us, and the great clock in the mind, having nothing left to measure but the silence, finally starts to slow. We stop demanding certainty from the future and stop demanding perfection from the past. We simply are, here, now. And that, in the wisdom of Augustine, is all the time we ever needed. The Tolle Lege moment, the sudden conversion that changes everything. The house is still, that deep midnight quiet that isn't silence, but the muffling of the world's constant demands. This is the hour when the mind, deprived of distraction, starts its inventory. It's the time when St. Augustine comes calling. He wasn't just a theologian, he was the patron saint of the overthinker, the brilliant insomniac, the man who knew, with agonizing clarity, exactly what he should be doing, and yet repeatedly chose the opposite. His early life, recounted in the Confessions, is a relentless, exhausting study of desire unmoored. We often sanitize him, turning him into a bronze statue of piety, but we forget the heat of his struggle. He wasn't resisting minor temptations, he was battling an elemental, structural flaw in the human machine. Augustine spent years trapped between philosophical enlightenment and physical addiction. He had the sharpest mind in the Roman world. He could dismantle Manichaeism, Rhetoric, and skepticism before breakfast, but he couldn't put down his own bad habits. He loved knowledge, but he loved the comfort of his familiar chaos more. He famously prayed, "Grant me chastity and continence, but not yet." It is the universal prayer of the procrastinator, the conflicted soul clinging to the very chains it begs to have removed. This is the core Augustinian hidden truth. The problem of life isn't ignorance, it's a fractured will. We don't fail because we don't know better. We fail because we are divided. We are two people living in one body, each gripping the steering wheel and pulling in opposite directions. The struggle, the constant wrestling match between the person we are and the person we aspire to be is exhausting. It is the defining feature of spiritual sickness, the paralysis of knowing the good while enacting the bad. This internal civil war reached its absolute breaking point in a garden in Milan. Augustine, intellectually defeated, emotionally spent, wept uncontrollably under a fig tree. He was suffering not from intellectual doubt, but from profound shame and impotence. The entire weight of his wasted years, the brilliance squandered on temporary pleasures, came crashing down. He had reached the limits of self-help. He had reached the end of human effort. He was lying there, raw and broken, when he heard it, a sound that shouldn't have been there. The sing-song voice of a child, perhaps playing, perhaps chanting, repeating a simple phrase, Tolle, Lege, Tolle, Lege. Take up and read, take up and read. It was absurd, a children's game breaking the profound silence of his personal apocalypse. But the instruction was crystal clear, piercing the noise of his own despair. He grabbed the nearest book of scripture, Paul's epistle to the Romans, and opened it without deliberation. His eyes fell upon a single passage, a prescription so precise it felt like an accusation. Not in reveling and drunkenness, not in lust and wantonness, not in quarreling and jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. That was it. The entire elaborate intellectual edifice of his resistance collapsed instantly. It wasn't an argument, he read. It was a door. The fight was over. The conversion was complete. The critical instruction of the Tolle Lege moment isn't just about reading the Bible, it's about the cessation of effort. For Augustine, the conversion was the realization that he couldn't will himself whole. The division in his own will was the illness, and sheer effort was merely feeding the disease. The breakthrough came when he surrendered the steering wheel entirely. He stopped trying to conquer the flesh and instead allowed something else, something external, divine, to inhabit the center of his consciousness. His desire didn't vanish, it was rerouted. The powerful engine of ambition, lust, and intellectual craving which had driven him wildly off course for 30 years was finally aimed at a stable, ultimate destination. Faith for Augustine wasn't a sentimental feeling, it was the ultimate act of logic, the only sensible response to a life defined by restlessness. We live in a world that promises rest through acquisition, the perfect career, the perfect relationship, the final achievement. But the Augustinian truth remains, all temporary ends, no matter how glorious, eventually leave us thirsty. The sudden conversion that changes everything isn't usually a boom of thunder. It's the quiet acceptance that you cannot fix yourself. It's the realization that true freedom isn't found in satisfying every passing impulse, but in discovering that central truth that stabilizes the heart. His words echo across the millennia, settling into the quiet corners of our own sleepless nights. Our hearts are restless until they find their rest in Thee. We are halfway through the night. If you wish to continue walking this path of deep questioning with us, subscribe now and let us finish the journey together. Memory as the palace of God, introspection as a path to divine truth. There is a moment just before sleep takes hold, a suspension of the self. The house is silent, the day's frantic signal has been cut, and the mind, denied external distraction, begins its restless work. We call this introspection, but it is far more than mere reflection. It is the pilgrimage of the soul within its own sacred geography. This is the hour Augustine knew intimately. the time when we confront the great paradox of human existence, our profound smallness set against the incomprehensible vastness of our own inner world. Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, gave us the most enduring map of this terrain. He didn't describe the brain as a machine or a processor. He called it the palace of memory, a cavernous, infinite structure, holding not just history but wisdom, and crucially, the very presence of God. If the meaning of life is truth, then the path to that truth must be introspection. We cannot find the blueprint outside the edifice, but what is it that drives us to look inward? It is the ceaseless, burning need for ultimate happiness, which Augustine claimed was synonymous with ultimate truth. Our hearts, he famously wrote, are restless until they rest in thee. This is the ultimate statement on human desire. Every ambition we pursue, every fleeting pleasure we chase, every status we desperately attain, is fundamentally a misdirected attempt to fill a hole that is inherently God-shaped. We look for the infinite in finite objects and are endlessly disappointed. The palace of memory is the stage where this internal drama plays out. It's not a dusty attic of old facts. It's a living, breathing dimension where the things we love and the things we despise coexist. When we are truly introspective, we are not merely reminiscing. We are excavating. We are walking the endless, echoing corridors, searching for the hidden knowledge that defines our purpose. We search for God, Augustine argues, not by looking up at the sky, but by plunging into the depths of the self. Because if God is truth, and if that truth undergirds all existence, then it must also reside within the core fabric of our being. The act of turning inward, therefore, is not self-absorption. It is an act of divine seeking. Think of the corridors in your own palace. There are chambers dedicated to regret, sealed off by shame. There are bright, sunlit galleries housing perfect joy. But perhaps the most vital section is the vault of forgotten faith, the wisdom you once possessed, the truths you accepted in innocence, only to be buried beneath the debris of cynical experience. The contemplative life is the process of unlocking those doors. It's the realization that the highest knowledge, the meaning of life, is not revealed in some dramatic external revelation, but is discovered, resident and waiting, beneath the superficial layer of consciousness. This journey demands absolute honesty. Augustine's life was defined by the struggle between physical desire and spiritual devotion. He understood that our biggest barrier to divine truth is often the persistent, sticky pull of the immediate material world. We are tethered to the ground by our own appetites, even as we yearn for the boundless sky. Faith, in this context, is simply the decision to prioritize the soul's landscape over the world's clamor. It is the practice of relinquishing control and accepting that the restlessness will only cease when the heart yields to the design woven into its very existence. The waiting for sleep becomes a metaphor for this yielding. We let go of the day's duties, we release the desperate need to manage the future, and we allow the deepest, most quiet part of ourselves to take over. The path to divine truth is not steep, it is deep. It requires no maps of the globe, only courage to navigate the intricate, sacred geography of the self. The palace of God is not distant, it is within. And the key to its quiet, infinite wisdom is the stillness we find when the world and the ego finally fall silent. Finding peace in Milan, the role of mentorship, Ambrose, in conversion. The air of Milan was thick, even at this hour. I lay suspended, waiting for sleep to claim me, but my mind was a stage where old battles were fought anew, silent and relentless. Every shadow in the room felt like a chain, forged not by iron, but by the relentless tenacity of my own past. How many nights had I searched for meaning in the noise of ambition? I chased rhetorical perfection, the applause of the powerful, the fleeting comfort of physical fulfillment. I mistook desire for destiny. I believed that if I could only think clearly enough, I would be free. This was my profoundest error, the arrogance of the scholar who trusts only the razor edge of his own intellect. My journey to the city was meant to be a triumph. Instead, it became a necessary surrender. I came here seeking fame, and I found Bishop Ambrose. Ambrose. He didn't just speak the truth, he embodied it. His eloquence was not the ornate, hollow shell I had perfected. It was fire drawn from a deep, hidden source. I observed him, cynical at first, ready to dissect his logic, but finding only a man whose life mirrored his sermons. He was the living, breathing answer to the skepticism that had poisoned my heart for years. The Manichaeans had tried to lock the door to Scripture with simplistic, literal keys. They saw contradictions where there was only depth. Ambrose, with the steady hand of a master architect, showed me the allegorical reading, the door that led to an ocean, not a shallow puddle of text. He revealed that the word was deeper, grander, a vast, complex narrative of grace. Through him, I began to see the possibility of a faith that was not intellectual suicide, but intellectual completion. He chipped away at my pride, not with argument, but with example. He was proof that holiness and genius were not mutually exclusive. Indeed, they were mutually reinforcing. But seeing the path is not the same as walking it, and this is where the hidden truth of my paralysis lay. The struggle was no longer about knowing what was right, it was about doing it. I knew the chasm that separated my intellectual assent from my actual will. The chains of habit, the vincula consuetudinis, held me fast. I hated the fact that I preferred the comfort of my old, dirty garments to the terrifying vulnerability of pure new cloth. My desire was bifurcated. Half of me screamed for the permanence of grace. The other clung desperately to the temporary sweet misery of mortal pleasure. Give me chastity, but not yet. That was the pathetic, desperate prayer of a man drowning in paradox. I was waiting for God to force the change, unwilling to take the step myself. I demanded permission to remain enslaved, even as I yearned for freedom. Ambrose never forced. He simply presented the standard, a life anchored in a reality outside the shifting sands of human emotion. He showed me the great cloud of witnesses, the ordinary people who had achieved what I, the brilliant orator, found impossible. The simple tenacity of a peasant's faith shamed the complex intellectual gyrations of my own pride. The meaning of life, I realized, was not found in exhaustive questioning, but in absolute commitment. It wasn't a philosophical equation to be solved, but a person to be embraced. The silence now is heavy, not with despair, but with imminence. The dark hours of the night are a crucible. I am tired of fighting myself. I am tired of chasing ghosts of desire. The peace I seek does not lie in more knowledge or more status or more perfect rhetoric. It lies in the simple, terrifying act of letting go. Tomorrow, perhaps, the sun will rise on a different kind of man. Tonight I wait, tethered between the man I was and the man Ambrose showed me I could be. The conversion is not merely an event. It is the slow, agonizing culmination of 1,000 small exposures to truth patiently administered until the dam finally breaks. And the water flows toward the sea. The truth always flows toward the sea. True Beatitudo, Augustine's criteria for undisturbed happiness. The hour is late. The superficial noises of the day have long since died away, leaving only the sound of thought echoing in the silence. It is in this profound stillness that we confront the question we spend our entire waking lives avoiding. What is happiness, truly? We spend our days chasing it, a promotion, a relationship, a moment of fleeting pleasure. But the chase is perpetual, the satisfaction temporary. Why? St. Augustine, sitting in the darkness 2 millennia ago, contemplated this very restlessness. He defined happiness not as an emotion, but as a state of being, Beatitudo, undisturbed happiness. For Augustine, happiness is the secure, eternal possession of that which fully satisfies the soul. And the criteria for this possession are devastatingly simple. If what you possess can be taken from you without your consent, then your happiness is vulnerable. It is contingent, and therefore, it is misery waiting to happen. Consider wealth. Fortune can steal it. Consider reputation. Slander can destroy it. Consider health. Time and disease are ruthless adversaries. These are goods, yes, but they are mutable, constantly decaying, subject to the chaotic flux of the temporal world. They fail the test of permanence. They are the sources of what Augustine termed misera, misery, because they promise stability but deliver only anxiety. If true happiness relies on security, then the object of our desire, the highest good, the summum bonum, must be indestructible, perfect, and eternally present. Where does the search lead us when the material world fails? It leads inevitably to the immutable. It leads to truth itself. If you possess wisdom, if you possess the knowledge of God, can a thief steal it? Can a shipwreck sink it? Can disease erode it? No. These possessions are internal, spiritual realities that exist independent of fortune's wheel. They are inseparable from the possessor against the possessor's will. This realization illuminates the root cause of our chronic dissatisfaction. We are designed for infinity, yet we attempt to fill ourselves with the finite. Augustine understood the nature of desire better than any modern philosopher. He saw the soul as a great hollow, a magnificent vessel so vast that pouring finite, transient things into it only serves to highlight the emptiness. We confuse acquisition with fulfillment. We believe more things will equal less anxiety, but the very opposite is true. More possessions only create more points of vulnerability. This is the meaning behind the most famous, most heart-rending cry in the history of theological philosophy. Fecisti nos ad te, et inquietum est cor nostrum donec requiescat in te. You have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. That restlessness is the soul's internal compass, pointing toward the eternal. It is the signal that the vessel is not merely lacking a few comforts, it is fundamentally misoriented. The Augustinian criteria for undisturbed happiness demand a reorientation of the will. True Beatitudo is found not in the pursuit of pleasure, but in the absolute security of resting upon the immutable. It is the joy that flows from possessing the truth. When the world collapses, when empires fall, or when the final breath approaches, the possessor of this ultimate reality remains untouched. They have secured the one thing that cannot be lost. They have found the meaning of life, not in acquisition, but in correct orientation, and in that profound rest, finally, they sleep. The restorative power of confession, clearing the mind for sleep. When the lights go out, the true screen illuminates. It is not the television, nor the phone, but the projection room behind your eyes. This is where the mind stages its nightly trial. Every omission, every misplaced word, every action you regret, returns, demanding attention. It's an internal combustion engine that refuses to shut off, and the primary fuel for this insomnia is cognitive debt, the unresolved truth of the day. We often talk about clearing the desk before bed, but the mental desk is far more cluttered. It requires more than tidying. It demands confession, not necessarily in the formal liturgical sense, but in the radical, private act of truth-telling to oneself. This self-accounting is the critical first step toward the restful blankness we crave. St. Augustine, in his sprawling, monumental text, Confessions, didn't invent the concept, but he perfected its delivery. He showed us the power of stripping away the protective veneer. Augustine didn't just confess sin, he confessed himself, his ambitions, his intellectual arrogance, his years of lingering attachment to the fleeting pleasures of the body, all laid bare for inspection. He understood that the things we hide, the secrets we keep even from our conscious selves, are the stones we carry into the deep water of sleep. Those stones keep us buoyant in the chaos, twitching, resistant to the simple surrender required by rest. Augustine's life was a masterclass in misdirected desire. He chased temporal satisfaction, rhetoric, love affairs, status, only to find an echoing emptiness at the center of each achievement. He wrote famously that our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. But strip away the theology, and what remains is a profound psychological insight. We are fundamentally restless until we align our deepest yearning, the desire for meaning, for purpose, with our daily actions. Insomnia, in this light, is often just the sound of that misalignment grinding away. It is the anxiety of realizing that the life you are living is not the life you were meant to live, or at least the one you wish you were living. Confession becomes the preemptive negotiation with the subconscious. It is saying, yes, I did that. I failed there. I felt that anger. I acknowledge it. It is placed on the record. Now, rest. When we refuse to articulate the truth of our past actions, memory cycles and recirculates them in a chaotic feedback loop. The mind feels it must stay awake to guard unacknowledged secrets, to run through endless defensive replays. Sleep is an act of trust, a quiet surrender, and the mind cannot surrender if it believes it must stand sentry over the day's indiscretions. Think of the act of confession as wiping a dusty slate clean, not erasing the memory, but simply removing the emotional charge attached to it. You are not seeking forgiveness from the external world. You are signing off on the internal ledger. The great, dramatic, tumultuous life of Augustine, searching for truth, searching for love, searching for knowledge, ultimately sought the very same simple biological and spiritual peace that we seek tonight, the profound stillness necessary for the brain to file the day away without argument. When the internal ledger is balanced, the prosecutor rests. The mind is no longer occupied with defense mechanisms, retroactive editing, or regretful what-ifs. There is simply space. A space where the frantic speed of thought slows, where the breath deepens, and where the heavy curtain of sleep finally, mercifully, begins to draw closed. We stop resisting the truth of who we were today, and only then can we truly prepare to become who we will be tomorrow. This is the peace found in radical acceptance, the quiet foundation upon which true rest is built. It is the restorative power of speaking the hidden truth, allowing the mind to finally trust itself enough to close its eyes. Is there purpose in sleeplessness? The vigil as a form of prayer. It is 3:17 a.m. The air in the room is thin, dusted with the peculiar silence of a city that knows it should be sleeping, but isn't quite. This hour, the deep, dark heart of the night, is where the mind stops performing for the audience of the day and begins its truest, most dangerous rehearsals. We seek comfort in the notion that insomnia is a deficit, a lack of rest, a failure of the body. But what if it isn't a deficit at all? What if sleeplessness is a sudden radical surplus, a superabundance of wakefulness that forces us into contemplation, into a vigil we didn't sign up for? It feels like a curse, of course, the dragging fatigue that promises to ruin the morning before it even arrives, the relentless looping of petty anxieties, the negotiation with the pillow, the sheets, the ceiling fan, as if they are conspirators in some grand malicious plot. But there is a silence here that the daytime never permits. A profound quietude that, if you lean into it, stops being empty and starts becoming resonant. This is the hour of the monk, the mystic, the night watchman. And it is the hour of St. Augustine. Augustine, the restless genius. He didn't just write about desire, he wrestled with it in the dirt of his own youth. He knew the seductive pull of worldly things, the allure of ambition and sensual pleasure. He knew intimately the terrifying freedom of the will, and he knew the misery of chasing fulfillment down every alley except the one that mattered. He spent years awake in a different kind of vigil, the pursuit of truth, clarity, and God. But imagine him here, now lying on a simple pallet, the light of Hippo's moon slanting across his face. He is not a saint yet. He is just a man waiting for dawn. And in that waiting, the mind naturally turns to prayer. Not the formalized liturgy of the church, but the raw, unscheduled prayer of desperation. The vigil transforms into a form of involuntary supplication, because the sleepless night exposes our fundamental lack of control. We cannot command rest, just as we cannot command faith. We can only wait. And in that waiting, we must confront the central Augustinian question: what do I truly desire? We usually mask our desires with manageable goals, a promotion, a new car, a perfect relationship. But sleeplessness strips away the practical scaffolding. When we are truly alone in the existential dead zone of the night, we realize the real desire is wholeness. It is congruence. It is the end of the war between the self we are and the self we ought to be. Augustine gave us the famous cry, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in you." It is often quoted in tranquility, but it was forged in torment. It was the conclusion drawn after decades of wakeful searching. And here's the hidden truth for the insomniac. Your wakefulness is productive, not in the capitalist sense of checking emails or finishing a project, but in the spiritual sense. The sleepless night is a crucible. It burns away the distractions of the day until all that remains is the core, the raw nerve of the self. This forced stillness, this painful vigil, compels us to clarify our most fundamental commitments. Why are we so busy during the day? Because busyness is the ultimate distraction from meaning. We avoid the question of purpose by filling every available minute with activity. The 3 a.m. clock, however, issues an arrest warrant for evasion. It stops the clock on activity and demands contemplation. If purpose is derived from ultimate commitment, then the sleepless night, by forcing us to face our anxieties and desires unflinchingly, is a necessary pilgrimage toward purpose. We are not just failing to sleep. We are attending to the universe. We are standing watch. We are praying, not with our lips, but with the painful, wide-open attention of the soul. And perhaps when we finally collapse into rest, it is not merely the body surrendering to exhaustion, but the soul surrendering to clarity. That final, deepest rest is not the end of the vigil, but the answer to the prayer it contained. What you seek is seeking you, and sometimes it can only find you when you are too tired to run. The rest we seek. Why worldly achievements are always unsatisfying. We spend our lives climbing. We want the view from the top. We achieve the milestones, the title, the salary, the perfect relationship, the restored health. We tell ourselves, "Then I will rest." But the moment we finally stand on that summit, the wind hits us differently. It's not the stillness of deep satisfaction. It is the piercing clarity of realization. The view changes, but the striving doesn't stop. The peak we reached only reveals the next higher mountain. We confuse achievement with fulfillment. Achievement is quantitative. It can be measured, displayed, and celebrated for a week. Fulfillment, however, is qualitative. It is the internal state of being complete, of existing in alignment. The temporary nature of worldly victory is its defining flaw. A major promotion brings pride until the demands of the new role erase the joy. The new possessions fade into the background noise of daily life. The thrill of success is metabolized by the soul and quickly found wanting. If we pursue finite goods to satisfy an infinite thirst, we are guaranteed perpetual dissatisfaction. It is the simple mathematics of the soul. You cannot contain the ocean in a teacup. This isn't a modern problem unique to late capitalism or the age of perpetual scrolling. This is the oldest human riddle. 1600 years ago, a deeply conflicted, endlessly restless genius named Augustine of Hippo articulated the diagnosis with a terrifying precision. He understood that our striving, our endemic anxiety, our inability to settle was not an error in the system. It was the system itself. Augustine gave us the definitive answer to the human condition, an answer whispered in the quiet of his conversion, a secret embedded in our very biology. Fecisti nos ad te, et inquietum est cor nostrum, donec requiescat in te. You have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. This is not a religious platitude, it is a profound observation about human physics. The restlessness itself is the proof. It proves that the container of our desire is too vast for anything the world can offer. If we could be truly satisfied by money, we would stop at the first billion. If we could be satisfied by fame, we would stop after the first standing ovation. But the hunger returns, always. It is a recurring charge we can never pay off, because the debt is owed to the infinite. The pursuit of happiness is often tragically misdirected. We seek rest in the accumulation of things, rather than the alignment of the spirit. We believe rest is the absence of striving. Augustine suggests that true rest is not inactivity, it is harmony. It is the moment the arrow of your life finds its true target. Think of a finely tuned instrument. Until the strings are perfectly tightened, aligned to the proper pitch, they vibrate noisily, out of sync. Our hearts vibrate noisily. The only way to achieve internal rest is to tune the instrument of the self to the ultimate standard, to the source from which the desire originated. The things we chase, the temporary triumphs, the fleeting pleasures, the approval of others, they are only shadows cast by the true object of our longing. We grasp the shadow, find it insubstantial, and then, immediately, reach for the next one, hoping that this time the shadow will hold. It is in this stillness, waiting for sleep to arrive, that the noise of the worldly achievements begins to fade. The trophies don't shine in the dark. The bank account means nothing to the approaching quiet. And in that silence, we feel the great, vast emptiness that the world simply cannot fill. It is only when we acknowledge the size of the whole that we can begin to understand the size of the infinite intended to fill it. The rest we seek is not found at the finish line of earthly goals. It is found in the surrender to the fact that our home is somewhere else, and our inherent, beautiful, driving dissatisfaction is simply the mechanism pointing the way back. Rhetoric and truth, giving up clever sophistry for sincere belief. The room is silent, save for the hum of a restless mind waiting for morning. This is the hour when the defenses fall and the intellectual armory we carry through the day clatters uselessly to the floor. Augustine knew this silence well. He was, after all, the great master of noise, a celebrated gladiator of the word, whose very voice could turn the tide of a debate, whose rhetorical flourish could make palatable the most convoluted or shaky premise. His early life was a love affair with cleverness. He didn't just seek truth, he sought the most beautiful way to express his search. He loved the scaffolding of the argument more than the weight of the foundation. He reveled in the perfect structure of the sentence, the precision of the predicate, the sheer, undeniable power that comes from being able to convince anyone of almost anything. But the sophist, no matter how lauded, eventually runs into a wall, the emptiness of his own victory. What good is a flawlessly constructed argument if the subject of that argument holds no ontological weight? Rhetoric is the sword we use to carve out intellectual territory. It is a necessary tool of civilization, but in the hands of the arrogant or the fearful, it becomes merely a shield against genuine inquiry. For Augustine, it became a subtle cage. He spent years believing that if he could just craft the perfect justification for his doubts, if he could just find the right words to articulate the inherent flaws in creation, then the universe would bend to his logic. This is the fatal trap of the supremely intelligent seeker, the belief that truth must be won through complex dialectic, that sincerity is somehow intellectually weak. His long dalliance with Manichaeism was fueled in part by this pride. The dualistic narrative of light and dark offered a satisfyingly complex, yet intellectually manageable, explanation for evil. It was clean, it was clever, it allowed him to keep God at arm's length, maintaining his role as the sophisticated observer rather than the humble participant. He could debate the mechanics of the cosmos without ever having to surrender his own self-sufficiency. But the real transformation, the one that cracked open his world and changed the course of history, began the moment he realized he had to stop being so damn good at arguing. He had to give up the beautiful lie for the ugly, uncomfortable truth. Truth, it turned out, did not require dazzling ornamentation or complex evasions. It did not require a 4-hour lecture on causality. It required belief, a willingness to accept what the heart saw, even if the mind hadn't yet filed the final legal brief. This was the great humility required of him, to willingly dismiss the very intellectual mastery that had defined his career, to admit that his celebrated cleverness, his profound ability to twist words and shape perception, had actually been a significant barrier to the very God he claimed to be searching for. He had to stop loving the sound of his own voice and listen instead for the silence of genuine conviction. To abandon sophistry is to abandon the intellectual playground where you are always king. It is to step out into the frightening simplicity of sincere belief, where your ego has no role and your academic accolades carry no weight. What Augustine teaches us, lying here in the dark, is that the meaning of life isn't found at the end of a perfect syllogism. It is found at the beginning of an act of surrender. The highest form of intellectual pursuit is not winning the debate. It is knowing when to stop debating and start living the answer. The moment he gave up the necessity of winning, he finally found the possibility of rest, the kind of rest that allows the weary mind at last to sleep. The danger of delay, why Augustine feared not yet. The waiting room of the soul, that's where we spend most of our lives, isn't it? Waiting for the right moment, waiting for permission, waiting for transformation to suddenly arrive fully formed like a messenger dropped from the ceiling. We think of Augustine's conversion in that garden, the Tolle Lege, the moment of profound, instant change, as a story of ultimate breakthrough. But that moment was preceded by a decade of catastrophic procrastination. We focus on the light, but we should look at the shadow that light overcame. He knew what was right. He knew what he wanted to be, but wanting isn't the same as doing. Desire without commitment is just philosophical inertia, and inertia is what nearly killed his soul. The great danger wasn't doubt. He was a brilliant theologian. Doubt was just intellectual exercise to him. The danger was the whisper in his own ear, the seductive, familiar comfort of the small word, tomorrow. Tomorrow is the thief of salvation. When we read his confessions, we hear the panic in his voice, this deep human fear that is so often overlooked. It wasn't a fear of hellfire, not primarily. It was the fear of wasting the gift, of watching his own potential die of self-neglect. He famously writes about struggling to give up the mistress, the comfort of physical habit. And we focus on the sex, on the morality, but that misses the point entirely. The mistress was just the symptom. The true affair was with delay. Grant me chastity and continence, but please, not yet. This is the sentence that defines the struggle. It isn't a prayer. It's a bargain struck with the self. It's the voice we all use when we scroll past the gym membership, when we put off the necessary conversation, when we promise ourselves we'll start the hard work. Monday. The not yet is an act of temporal suicide. You are killing the self that exists now by promising to revive it later, under conditions that are always perfectly ideal and therefore eternally unattainable. Augustine realized that the devil doesn't need to tempt us into sin. He just needs to convince us that there is plenty of time, because time doesn't make things easier. Time hardens the habits. Time makes the chains of comfortable routine heavier. Every time he said not yet, he wasn't just putting off conversion. He was actively consolidating his current unsatisfactory life. He was reinforcing the pathways of mediocrity. His fear became this agonizing awareness. What if he died on a not yet day? What if the opportunity for true change, for radical commitment, passed while he was still enjoying the final sweet, poisonous sip of procrastination? We have this modern habit of seeing life as a series of soft transitions. We expect the shift from one state to another to be gentle, phased, almost imperceptible. Augustine knew that sometimes the necessary change requires a rupture, a violent self-imposed breaking. The breakthrough in the garden wasn't a discovery of God. It was a discovery of urgency. It was the recognition that the present moment is the only moment available for action, for commitment, for salvation. The danger of delay is not that you fail to get what you want, but that in the prolonged act of waiting, you become so perfectly adapted to the life you tolerate that the life you truly desire becomes structurally impossible, and the silence of the night, when the distractions recede, often brings that terrifying clarity, that the not yet of yesterday is the too late of today. We do not wait for the divine. The divine waits for us, but it waits patiently, knowing that the moment we choose to act is the only moment that actually exists. The only safe day is today. The only safe word is now. Practicing presence, how to anchor your mind in the eternal now. It's 3 a.m. The clock faces cruel geometry. You are waiting for sleep, but sleep requires stillness, and your mind refuses to be still. It runs endless loops. The embarrassing thing you said yesterday, the terrifying deadline next week, the long list of things left undone. We call this insomnia, but philosophically it is simply a failure of presence. We are trying to inhabit two moments simultaneously, neither of which truly exists. The past is gone. It is merely the ghost of a feeling stored as memory. The future is an absolute fiction, a tapestry of hope and fear woven entirely from speculation. Yet our anxiety is generated exclusively in these non-places. We are trapped in a temporal double bind, using the only tool we have, the mind, to escape the only moment we possess, the present. This struggle is not new. Across 2 millennia, one man articulated this strange physics of time with an honesty that still shakes the foundations of modern thought. Saint Augustine of Hippo. Augustine, in his Confessions, stares directly at time, trying to understand what it even is. He writes, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know what it is. If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I do not know." This is not confusion. It is the deep realization of a paradox. We measure time constantly, seconds, minutes, eras. But when we try to hold the present moment, it instantly vanishes. It is the infinite retreat of the vanishing point. Augustine realized that we can only speak of time as a distension of the soul, a stretching. He saw that the present moment, the now, cannot truly be a duration. If it has duration, it can be split into past and future, meaning it is already gone. Therefore, the true present is instantaneous, unmeasurable, and purely received. But we live and we perceive duration. How? Augustine offered his famous solution. Time exists only in the mind. He argued that the past does not exist as the past, but as the present of the past, which is memory. The future does not exist as the future, but as the present of the future, which is expectation. And the fleeting present itself, it is the present of the present, which is attention or contemplation. If we understand this, the restless mind waiting for sleep takes on a new meaning. Your mind is not running away from you, it is desperately trying to synthesize memory, expectation, and attention into a comprehensible existence, but in doing so, it misses the only stable point. For Augustine, who came to define Western spirituality, the true anchor cannot be found by manipulating these 3 mental constructs. It must be found outside them, in the source they flow from. That source is the eternal now, the absolute ground of reality. This is where desire and faith intersect with presence. Augustine understood that human life is driven by radical desire, a restless heart seeking rest. We desire meaning, we desire permanence, we chase shadows of permanence in achievements, relationships, or material things, because we mistake the temporary for the eternal. Practicing presence, then, is not merely a mental exercise to lower your heart rate, it is an act of spiritual alignment. It is the radical acceptance that the present moment, however simple, the feeling of the sheet, the sound of the refrigerator hum, is the only conduit to the eternal. It is the intersection point where our vanishing reality touches the unwavering truth. When you are waiting for sleep, stop trying to calculate how much time you have left. Stop measuring the duration. Instead, practice receiving the infinitesimal present. Don't fight the memory. Acknowledge it is just a shape in the sand of your mind. Don't fight the expectation. Note that it is just a speculative map. Your breath is the ultimate instrument of presence because breathing, by definition, cannot be done yesterday or tomorrow. It is always happening now. Anchor your mind in the simple, continuous arrival of the breath. In this attention, the scattered fragments of past and future begin to coalesce. The desperate grasping for meaning eases because you are resting, finally, in the understanding that the meaning of life is not found by chasing duration, but by inhabiting the vanishing, eternal now. The restless heart finds its home, and only then does sleep arrive. Ending the search, finding absolute rest in the absolute good. We are here again, caught in the late hours. The body is still, perhaps, but the mind remains a turning engine, unable to shift into neutral. We wait for sleep, but what we are truly waiting for is rest. We live our lives as seekers. We are driven by a hunger so profound that it defines our very existence. And no matter what we consume, no matter the achievement, the love, the wealth, that hunger remains, clawing at the edges of our satisfaction. St. Augustine knew this feeling better than anyone. He understood that the human heart is fundamentally restless. It is built for infinity, yet constantly tries to quench itself with finite things. And every time we grab hold of something temporary, something achievable, the heart drinks deeply, spits it out, and immediately begins searching for the next source. Think of the journey. We chase beauty, hoping that its perfection will stop the need to look further. We pursue knowledge, believing that comprehension will provide the quietus. We grab for honor, thinking that recognition will finally fill the hollow space. We arrange our lives perfectly, the correct job, the perfect spouse, the secure future, only to realize that the perfection itself does not absorb the anxiety of existence. We look back on our conquests and ask, is this all? Augustine believed that all earthly goods are merely reflections. They are hints of the true good, broken mirrors scattered across the road. The problem is not that these things are bad. The problem is that they are insufficient containers for the absolute desire we possess. The vessel is infinite. The contents are finite. The math never works. He frames the meaning of life not as the accumulation of goods, but as the relentless, unavoidable search for the origin point of all goodness. Where does beauty come from? Where does truth reside? The very mechanism of desire points towards something beyond the desire itself. He speaks a hidden truth that most of us avoid until the midnight hour. We cannot stop desiring. Desire is the engine of the soul. The meaning of life is not to abolish desire, but to reorient it. This reorientation is what he called conversion. It is the moment we stop trying to coerce the temporary things, power, pleasure, fame, into delivering the eternal satisfaction they cannot possibly hold. It is the turning away from the stream and the turning toward the source. The mistake of our restless pursuit is thinking the destination is another object, another success, another experience. But Augustine shows us that the destination is the absolute good itself, the unchanging source from which all lesser goods derive their fleeting worth. He writes that the absolute good is the only terminus strong enough to absorb the infinite force of human longing. To find rest is not to cease movement. It is to arrive at the place where the need to move has genuinely stopped. We spend so much time running from pain or running toward pleasure. But the goal, the true rest, is found in realizing that the source of joy is not external to us, but is the ground upon which our being stands. It is the realization that the thing you are seeking is the foundation of the very act of searching. When we align the infinite desire of the heart with the absolute good, the turbulence stops. The heart, finally home, says, I have searched everywhere, and I was wrong about the nature of the destination. I was seeking a thing, but I needed a state of being. This is the essence of faith for Augustine. It is the end of the negotiation. It is the cessation of the pursuit of cheaper imitations. It is the deep recognition that our ultimate satisfaction is guaranteed only by that which is unchanging, perfect, and absolute. The search ends when we realize that the treasure was not hidden far away, but was present in the structure of the longing itself. The human condition is characterized by desire, but the desire is satisfied by rest, a rest that is full, permanent, and complete. So, as the world quiets and the shadows deepen, the search must end somewhere. The screen fades to black, the curtain falls. The quiet truth whispers the words that echo across centuries of human striving. Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in thee, and in that final admission, the mind, finally satisfied, finally home, allows itself to fall silent. If you have reached this final silence, you are one of the few. Simply write rest below, so we know you found your way home.